If you have any questions, any suggestions, please come and see anyone. Thank you.
Two more brief announcements. One is that we will be taking Irene to dinner tonight at the Green Turtle in Berkeley. Any of you who would like to join us up to a point, or meaning not the whole class, presumably, but any of you who would like to join us, we would like to have you, and there'll be more opportunity to talk with her, and maybe Doug can stay a little while. I'm not sure. It's in the Padre Center in Rohnert Park if you want to come talk to me after the class. Next week, we have Phil Beard, Professor of German Studies here on the campus, and Dr. Diane Parness from the Political Science Department, both specialists in European affairs, who will be speaking on Nazis and political issues of Europe next week. Towards the end of the series, we bring the Holocaust issues and genocide issues into some of the current political affairs that are happening around the world, so that we can try to make the application to our present times and how we need to respond to that. When we face the darkness that is the Holocaust, one of the bright things that we hold up against it like candles are the individuals and the group who acted with moral courage to help Jews during the Holocaust or to do righteous acts. And today we have Irene Opdyke, who is one of those righteous Gentiles, and we have Doug Hoenecke, who has made a long-time study of altruism, moral courage, and rescuers. And Rob Coleman of the Alliance for the Study of the Holocaust will be introducing them. Rob.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon. Welcome, Irene, and welcome, Reverend Hoenecke. Our format today is such that we have two speakers, and they're going to speak consecutively for about an hour each, and at the end of that period, we'll have questions. The first talk is a specific account by Irene, a rescuer, and then the Reverend's discussion, I think, will be more generic and try to put some general principles together about the qualities of viewers. Reverend Hoenecke is the pastor of the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Tiburon. He has written extensively on Holocaust and related themes, including the moral and spiritual development of Nazi-era rescuers. He has written a biography of the German rescuer Hermann Graebe. Irene Opdyke, who lives in Southern California and has been good enough to come up here and visit with us today, is a rescuer of Jews in Poland. She is featured in the book and the movie Courage to Care. She has written her own book, which she has with her here today, Into the Flames, and she has saved at least 12 lives directly. I guess it's 13 if you count the fact that one of the women was pregnant that she saved. And she has warned over 200 additional people of their impending murder, some of whom were able to escape. Irene is going to start it off. Go, Irene.
Thank you. Reverend Hoenecke, my dear friends, I am so thrilled and privileged to be invited to speak to you. And most of all, I see so many wonderful young people, ladies and gentlemen. And this is to me, you are the most important people, because you are the future leaders of nations. You are the one that will make the difference, how our world will look. I speak to many, many schools, from the 6th grade through college. All I want to do to you people, regardless of nationalities, religion, color, or creed. Because only when we understand that we are all the same, that there is only one race, the human race, we can build a better future. And it's starting from you. We, the survivors and rescuers, we are old. Soon we will not be here. So it's our responsibility to speak. to record the eyewitness testimony. I was only 17 when war started in faraway Poland. I was raised in a Catholic home. I did have 4 younger sisters and wonderful young parents who at that time taught us to play with children regardless of nationalities or religious beliefs. Maybe because of that, I turned this way that I was able to help. It is so important for people to raise the children the right way. When I finished high school, I wanted more than anything to be another Florence Nightingale. That was my desire. So parents signed me to the best nursing school in middle of Poland. My home was very close to German border, but my school was middle of Poland. I did have to leave my home because I wanted to study. With the zest of youth, I tried to be the best. But Hitler, without declaring war, invaded my country. He was moving with heavy war machinery, destroying everything, killing people. I was there. I was there when he took my country and used as a destruction place for human race. I could not go home. Hitler was moving with the speed of lightning. The place that my home was now Germany. I could not go. I was forced to face the war alone. One day I am with my parents, with my sisters. Next day there is a war and I am alone. Even in the hospital, I was supposed to study and learn. There were so many people wounded and dead. We worked day and night, tried to help, but Hitler was moving with the speed of lightning. Polish military did have to retreat. Some of the nurses, the oldest, they felt responsible for me. They took me with them. They joined Polish army. For days we were on a run. Hitler was pursuing. In 3 weeks, almost by the Russian border, the war was over. Hitler and Stalin made a pact. They divided my country. And I was so far from home. I did not know what to do and where to go. So with remnants of Polish army and nurses, we escaped to the big Ukrainian forest. But the winter was coming. It was cold. We were not prepared to live there. But there was nothing else we could do. Just before Christmas 1939, big Russian patrol overtook us. I ran. I was so scared. For the first time, I did see the Russian soldiers with the bayonets affixed. I ran. 3 Russian soldiers got hold of me. I was brutally violated by Russian soldiers. I was beaten, and I was left in snow to die because it was cold. But I did not die because God did have other plans for me. Somebody found me, brought me to a Russian hospital where Russian woman doctor of me, not only as a physician, but as mother would do in this situation. So I survived. In 1940, end of 1940, there was exchange of Polish population between the German and Russian. And I wanted to find my family. But I could not go there where my home was, because that was Germany. But I did go to middle of Poland, Radom, and try to find my family. I did not know how I survived. Luckily, I find a girlfriend with whom I went to the nursing school. She offered me her home. And I planned and I prayed that I find somebody. Instead, one day, I was picked up right from the church on the Sunday after the service. The church was surrounded. They picked all young men and women, took us on a truck. We did not know what it will happen to us. They brought us to ammunition factory. Radom did have very big ammunition factory, which the German took over. Well, for the first time, I realized what was happening to my Jewish friends. Also, what was happening to some Polish persecuted people, to the Jews. There was nothing I could do. We were forced to work. One day, I fainted, and I fainted right in the front of an old German major. My lungs were weak, because in my early teens, I did have a beginning of tuberculosis, and the chemicals made me so sick that I fainted right in the front of the old German major. When I came to it, he asked me my name. Well, I say Irena Gutowna, because that's how in Poland, when my name is Irene Gut at that time, but Gutowna, that's how it was pronounced in Poland. They say Mr. Gut, Mrs. Gutowa. I was Miss Gutowna. He said, are you Volksdeutsche? I said, no, I am Polish. Well, he said, you honest, you don't want to grab the opportunity to say, to better yourself, I will give you another job. So he assigned me to serve breakfast, luncheon, and dinner to his officers and secretaries. The food was good. I started feeling better, but one day, as I was going to work, a different way as usually, I came face to face with a nightmare, with unbelievable horror. Some of the streets were barricaded with barriers. There were so many Nazis. They were yelling, screaming, shooting. They did not allow anyone to stand across the street. I was petrified. For the first time, I did see so many Nazis, so I ran. There was an empty house right by the street. From that house, through the boarded windows, I witnessed a nightmare that changed my life. The SS were beating, pushing, kicking mass of people from beyond the encampment. There were so many old men and women, pregnant women, people on the crutches, people wounded, and most of all, children. All sizes, all ages, little tiny ones, 2, 3, 4 years old. They were going to death alone because the parents were strong enough to be a slave labor. And I was standing there, and through the boarded windows, witnessing this. It was unbelievable. Even did see a young woman with an infant in her arm. It was too far for me to hear what was said, but I noticed with one movement of his arm, the SS pulled a baby and threw with the head to the ground. I will never forget that inhuman scream of mother as she leaped to save her child. With one bullet to her head, she was dead, laying next to her child. And I could only stay and ask, oh God, where are you? Where are you? When I was coming down, I can hear shooting from far away. And I knew that each shot was aimed to kill another human being. They pushed them like cattle through the town. Behind the town was a shallow grave. They used machine gun. The lucky ones, they were dead, because many were buried alive. I am a witness to this crime. I was there in my girlfriend's house that night. I could not pray. I believe in God. I was born to Catholic faith, but I could not believe it. Like a little child, I threw tantrum against my maker. But you know, in the morning, somehow, there was an answer in my soul, in my heart, that God give us free will to be good or bad. We cannot blame God. He gave free will, and it's up to us to choose what we want it to be, which road we take, the evil one or good one. I ask God for forgiveness, and I ask for the opportunity to help, even if my life depends. And the opportunity arrived. Now it was end of 1941. Now the Russian and German were not friends anymore. Now the German were fighting the Russian and pushing them almost. And a part of the ammunition plant was moved behind the advancing German army. And I was moved with the plant. And I find myself back in Ukraine. There, the old major gave me the same responsibility to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner to his officers and secretaries, but also he gave me another job to take care of the laundry room for the German officers and secretaries. I met and befriended 12 Jewish people. They were people like all of us. There was a dressmaker, there was a tailor, there was a lawyer, there was a doctor, there was a teacher. People. Now without children, they were forced to do the job or die. And as I was carrying the laundry to them to be washed, we become friends. They trusted me. And they told me story of the broken lives. And as I was serving dinners to the German officers and secretaries, I noticed quite often the local head of the Gestapo, Sturmbannführer Rokita, sitting with the major at the dinner table. I make a show that I serve, and I was listening to the conversation. And soon I realized when the Gestapo man was making preparation for raids, unexpected raids on ghettos and work barracks. I start carrying the information to the laundry room to my 12 Jewish friends. And soon, without knowing what we were doing, we created Grapevine Information Center. I become the ears and the eyes for the Jewish people working there, around 300. I could not go to the factories because I have nothing to do there, but my friends from the laundry room, they could. So they spread the news when the raids will be. People were warned before action. Few have place to go, and some escaped to the big Ukrainian forest. About 8 kilometers from the town of Tarnopol was very woody, heavy forest. Many of the Jewish people and other persecuted people escaped there. We were able to save many lives. But when the time came for the total liquidation of ghettos and work barracks, I overheard the end is coming. I did help to my friends. They were besides themselves. They asked me, Irene, please help. But what could I do? I was alone. I did not have home. I did not have family. But I knew if I don't help, my friends will be dead. There was nothing I could do. I prayed like I never prayed before. I believe that miracle happened. Because a few days later, the old major called me and he said, I have a villa. You be my housekeeper. When I did see the villa, I just knew there is a place for my friends. And because it happened in the last minute, I trusted so strongly that God put me in the right place at that right time. So without making any preparation, when the time came, I opened the window to the villa, and one by one they came there. There were 12. I was so thankful, but I did not plan it. I did not know that the major did through some people that lived in there before. The villa was dirty. He wanted to clean the villa, paint it. Well, the German soldiers were doing the job. The people were there. So when they were doing downstairs, I locked them in the attic. It was very hot. It was in June. It was so hot. There was not even window, but I could not do anything else. Well, when they finished with downstairs, going upstairs, I put them in a cellar. In a cellar was a servant's quarters, and I thought, oh, thank you, God. Now we will be safe. I asked the major if I may move to the servant quarters. He said, oh, no. You move by the kitchen. In a cellar, I have my orderly. Well, it was disaster. what I will do if he moved German soldier there. So he was a man about 68 years old. I was at that time 18, going on 19. And I told the major that I was violated by Russian soldiers, that I was so young, I was not even kissed by a boy. And I said, I will do everything for you. I will wash you shirts, clean your shoes. Please do not bring men. I am. Well, he said to me, well, we will try, but if you cannot do it, I will have big parties. If you cannot do it, I bring my orderly. Well, I don't know what we will do now, because any time he can bring it orderly. And the orderly will live in a cellar, in the servants' quarters. We did have meeting. Two of the people from 12, I was hiding. They told me, Irene, you know, this villa was built by this architect. There must be a hiding place. We know, because when we were walking, we did see when the Germans were go from Germany through Poland to Ukraine, something was done in a garden. We start searching. Major did not move yet. We find it. Another miracle. Right underneath the coal chute was a wooden wall. When you expose a passage underneath the ground to the garden, and in the garden was a gazebo. Underneath the gazebo was a hiding place. Was not big, 9 by 9 octagon building with a very tall stone foundation in which there were many little ervens cleverly hidden. There were bushes all around. Dr. Lifshitz, who was the smallest in his size, he did go to check it out. He came out, he said, we survive, we have a place, we will survive. We were so happy, so quick. We put a pail with fresh water, pail for west, we put blankets, and we tried to see how long it will take to go from the cellar through the passage underneath the gazebo, and we were surviving. In meantime, in Poland, on every street corner, there were signs saying, this town is Jew-free, and whoever will help, the sentence is death. But we were surviving. Two of the people from 12, the oldest couple, they were about 35 years old. About 2 months later, Ida told me, I am pregnant. I am with child. Everybody was scared. Baby will cry. We didn't know how long we will be. Dr. Lifshitz gave me prescription. He said, you have to feel it. We have to do something because we don't know how long. Baby will cry. We all lose their lives. I could not do it because like in kaleidoscope, I could see the children, the faces, the screaming, mama, mama, when they were going to death. I could not do it. So I pleaded for the life of the baby. Remember, I was so young, inexperienced, but I have such a faith that for reason is happening. I said, Ida, you will not have removed the baby. No. Hitler will not have that baby. I pleaded with them, and they finally, well, let's be. God is with us. And we were surviving. In meantime, in a forest, there were many, many people. I collaborated with another Christian girl. She was engaged to one of the Jewish men I was hiding. And many times, we were able to bring something to the people in a forest. They were not only from our plants, they were from other people. So what I could do, I brought it to the forest, but we were surviving. Now, the Russians were starting fighting the Germans, and they were coming from the Russia, coming closer to Tarnopol, to where we were. They were coming. And the rumors were that they were very strong and they will beat the Germans. Well, my friends, you know, I did not know that I was hiding them in a best house in Tarnopol, right under the noses of the Gestapo. We did have newspaper, we have the news, they can go bed and wash, and when the major was not in office. And now the front was coming closer. I knew that I have to do something, so I called Helen, the Christian girl that I read. She brought it one day slate and a horse. The major was in Lviv, another part of Ukraine. Her fiancé, that was tall and slender, spoke very good German. He put major's uniform, his hat, his coat. We put 3 men on the bottom of the slate, covered them with the blankets. I made a twice trip to the forest with 3 men each time. We brought a shovel and other things to help to bigger holes underneath the trees for the women. You know, there were so many German soldiers, they were saluting every 5 minutes. The Jewish men in a German major uniform. The major did not know, you know, that they are a people, you know. Well, one day I was in town, and like from nowhere, Gestapo was every place. And who on the street, Polish, Ukrainian, they push us to one place. They force us to watch a Polish couple with 2 little children and Jewish couple with a child. They were hanging in the middle of the marketplace. There is no way I can tell you how it felt to see and hear the children screaming. One human being was trying to help another. I was so distraught. I was so shaken. When I came to the villa, I forgot to close the door. Usually I lock the door, turn the key in the lock. But this time I was so shaken up. I walked in the kitchen, and 3 Jewish girls came out from the cellar to help me, as they usually did when I was alone. The door opened, and the major was standing right in front of us. He was looking from one to another with unbelief. He was shaking with anger. Then, without saying one more, turn around and walk very fast to his library. I was scared that he's calling the head of the Gestapo and they will come to get us. So I ran after him. I kneeled down. I was kissing his hands. I was holding. I was praying. I was pleading. First he pushed me away. But then I was pleading more. I say, you know that murder. You didn't kill. I didn't see you kill anyone. Please forgive me. They're innocent people. Nobody has right to kill. I did see a little softening in his old eyes. But he said, Irene, I have my orders. I don't want to see you dead, but I have my orders. Well, he said, I will go to my office. I have to have time to compose myself. But when I come back, I give my decision. In meantime, don't you dare to do anything stupid. He left. I locked the door. I ran downstairs. Everybody was ready to run out. Well, I could not let them go because it was during the day, and also I was not sure that the major is not calling the head of the Gestapo, and he's on the way to get us. So we made a quick decision. They will go underneath the gazebo. And if in 3 days I will not come and get them, that means I am arrested or dead. We said goodbye. And about 3 hours later, the major came. He was so drunk that he passed me by. He did not even look at me. And as I was standing in front of him, waiting for the decision of life or death, he pulled me on his lap. And he said, I have to be his, and willingly. It was not easy, but it was a small price to pay for so many lives. I did have to do what he wanted me, but we were surviving. Now the Russians were very close, coming closer and closer. Now it was 1944 in January, and they were closer. Then it comes to February, and the major said, the villa have to be evacuated. You have to do something with the women. He did not know, that the men were there too. But he said, you have to do it because the German front will take the villa. I knew that there is what will I do? So Helen brought a slate and a horse. We wrapped the women in a blankets. And now everybody was running from the town, Polish, Ukrainian, because the front was coming to town. I brought them to the forest, and I remained with them. March 15, 94, Red Army took that part of Ukraine. My friends were free, free. People broken spirit and body, without family, without loved ones, but they survived. For me, it was unbelievable joy. May the 4th, 1944, little boy was born. Little boy whose life began in German Medievilla. For me, it was payments in full to see that wonderful young life sprout from ashes of destruction. Now they were free, and I wanted to find my family. So only one way I could do it, I did have to join the partisans, because now the Russians were fighting the German and pushing them from Ukraine through Poland, and I need to go all the way to German border where my home was. I could not go alone. So I tried to inch closer with the partisans. Almost on my home steps, 1945, Russia took all of Poland. We won the war and we lost the freedom. And I was going to visit the young couple with the little boy. I stopped at the little temporary synagogue and asked if they know about the people. They said, oh yes, the family Haller with a little boy, they live here and here. The rabbi did go out to show me how to get there. And he said, you go right, left, and here. About 100 foot when I left him, the NKVD arrested me. I didn't know what they wanted. Well, they arrested me because of my association with the partisans. I thought that's it. I don't know what to do anymore. I was there for 10 days. I didn't know if anybody knew that I was arrested. One day opportunity arrived. I was alone with the open window. The bar were far apart. Without thinking, I swing my body and jumped, and I was free. I could not stand on my feet, but I was free. And where I go, I remember the address. The rabbi said, where the family. I went to the Haller's family. They said, what you doing here? We knew that you were arrested. We talked to the commissar. It was too late. I could not say, I am sorry, I escaped. So now they took me to Krakow, where my feet were very swollen because I broke some veins from jumping. They took me to Krakow, where I was like mother, little here, little there with the people I saved. To Lifshitz took care of my legs, and they find out that my mother was arrested with my sisters because of me. I wanted to give myself up, but they did not let me. My friends say, wait till you get better. Well, by the time I was better, they could not find my parents. My friends tried to find, they said, the Russians said they let go, my mother and sisters. We could not find them. I was now wanted in my own country. Now the Jewish people that I was helping them, they were helping me. They wrote my story in Jewish Historical Committee in Krakow, and they took me to Germany, to Hesse-Lichtenau, to Bavaria, to the Jewish repatriation camp, Jewish day camps. I was one Catholic living in a Jewish camp there. Jewish people were very proud of me. They want me interview, and I work in a laboratory, and I didn't know what will be with my life. There, I was so proud of the Jewish young men and women that grew during the Holocaust, and children that grew during the horrible time. They were going fighting for Israel with Haganah. I could not find my family. I didn't know what will be with my... I started learning Hebrew. I wanted to go, but it was not to be. I became so sick, I landed in a hospital, and when I came back, I was there for about 6 weeks. They left, and they left me behind with the old people and children. And I didn't know what I will do. Now, in 1948, a group of men come from United Nations, from the League of Nations. One of them was American. The Jewish people were very proud. They want me to be interviewed by the American. I spoke Polish, German, Russian, and little Yiddish. And he spoke English and French. 6 languages, not one common. Somebody translated my story. The gentleman was quite a few years old. He said, America will be very proud to have you. So in 1949, I come to this country, to New York. I was alone, without money, family, moral skills, not one word of English. But one thing I did have, I was free. And America did not owe me anything. I owed America. She accepted me. I am adopted daughter in this great country. So, in third day in the United States, I find myself work in a garment center because I knew Yiddish. That helped me to survive in New York. Because at that time, you know, the survivors were coming. And I work. 5 years later, become United States citizen. I pledge allegiance to America, to the land of the free. And one day, near the United Nations building, I stopped at little cafeteria, minding my own business, sitting, having coffee and cake. I was American. A gentleman come to my table because the place was packed. There was one chair. He said, Madame, I say, please. We start conversation. He looked at me. He said, I know you from someplace. And he started telling me my story. That was the man that interviewed me in Jewish repatriation camp. He was widower, so he invited me to dinner. Another dinner, 6 weeks, we were married. Year later, God bless us with a little girl, family on my own. And I put the biggest sign on my memo, not disturb. I didn't want to know about war, Holocaust. I wanted to raise my little girl. I wanted to know America. She grew like all our children, like you young ladies, and become beautiful lady, young girl. At 17, she married. And again, I didn't know yet anything about my family. I was one day reading the newspaper. The newspaper said, Holocaust never happened. It is propaganda. Well, that put me on fire. It was like a message. God gave me time to raise my child. My job not finished. I was so mad. I would go on a roof, scream and yell. I was there. How anybody can say so? 6 million of Jewish people, 3 million of millions of other nationality died, and they said it did not happen. I was mad. My husband belonged to the Rotary Club in Yorba Linda. He was very proud of me. So the Rotarian invited me to speak. For the first time in 1980, I opened my heart and I told my story to the Rotarian. Well, there was Rabbi Asa from Temple Batikva. He sent me to Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem, that is organization that check out the truth of different stories. From there, we received 4 letters from people I saved. My story was confirmed. And in 1982, I was invited to go to Jerusalem to plant the tree on the Avenue of the Righteous. And there, I pray for peace. I pray for peace. And I made a vow that for the rest of my life, I will travel, I will speak, I will tell and most of all, the young people, because they are the most important people. I want to share my story. and tell, reach out to each other, regardless of nationalities, religion, color, or creed. You're so lucky. You're studying and learning with all nationalities. Learn from each other. We are all the same. And we all have God. And how we pray to God. He's one, no matter what call, what name you gave him. He's there. We have just to know that it's up to us and it's up to you to change. Because soon, you will marry, you have children, and you assume responsibilities as a leaders, here, maybe in another countries. You be the leaders, and what you will do, that's what we will have for the rest of the world, I think. It is hard, but it's not impossible. If you just know, and if you see someone starting calling names and spreading hatreds, have the courage to tell, stop. One of you cannot do it, but if you together, say, they will stop. If not, the neo-Nazis, the skinheads, the Ku Klux Klans, they will grow in power, and it will be hard. For this reason, I am traveling, speaking. I speak 80% non-Jewish schools, Catholic school, all black school, inner city school, whoever. I speak to Rotary clubs, to Kivana clubs. I speak to Jewish day school, to Hebrew school, whoever, Women Alone, to all different organizations, whoever invites me. Don't know how long I can do it. My husband, who would be 86 years old, September the 16th, 82, he passed away. He did have Alzheimer. It was unbelievable. I didn't know what I will do. We were losing home. I reached finally to Rabbi Schulweis, who created organization to sustain the righteous Gentile. 2 days later, my husband was admitted home for the age in Resita. He was there for 5 years, and he did have a wonderful care, and God gave me the time to travel to speak. When he passed, the Jewish rabbi stayed with me till they came and picked his body. The Jewish rabbi said, prayer for death, a Kaddish for my husband. We are not Jewish. My rabbi, Rabbi Asa, who discovered, he did say Kaddish, prayer. And I have a little service in a church. My husband is dead. I loved him, but that's what I am doing. It gave me reason to stay alive. And we are getting old. How long I will do, I don't know. But whoever invites me, I want to speak. I want to unite people with all my heart and soul. And you know that miracle never ceased. This year in March, I was in New York. I spoke for the Young Women Division for UGA, United Jewish Appeal. Through my book, when I'm speaking, I take the book with me. Through my book, one of the ladies gave to the neighbor. She recognized herself in the book. She called me. We did have 47 years ago, I saved her life. We did have the greatest reunion, right? The 5th of March. I was brought to her apartment in Queens. I mean, it is unbelievable. It is like finding my mother or like my sister. In 1984, I found my 4 sisters. The story was The Courage to Care. And I was sent to Poland. And I find one sister, she knew where the other is. And I visit the grave of my family, my mother, my father. Two of my youngest sisters, the youngest sister, the number 4 and 5, I am number 1. They are in California visiting me. They living May 27. I cry already, but I am so thankful to God that I have them. And it was wonderful. Sometimes, like, when I left them, they were little girls. When I find them, they're all gray-haired women. And sometimes, like 3 little girls, we're talking, we're reminiscing, we're laughing. It will be very, very hard for me. But they come on a visiting visa. Cannot get it any other. God willing, maybe I can bring. I will try my best to ask for help, whoever. I wanted to have somebody. It is not easy. Now I'm alone. And it's not easy when I travel. Sometimes I'm only 4 days in month home. When I come home, my sister it's wonderful. But when I come now to home alone, it will be very hard. Thank you. Thank you, my wonderful young. Thank you, seniors. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me.
I've never had to follow Irene Updike, only introduce her and then be still. In 1977, I was on a sabbatical leave studying, responding, working in the archives of the former extermination Poland, East Germany, and to work in Israel at Yad Vashem, the place where Irene and several thousand other people are remembered and honored for the heroic work that you've just heard firsthand. When I arrived in Krakow, Poland, where I was going to take up residence for a time while working in the archives at Auschwitz, I arrived a day early and arranged to be taken by cab to the former extermination site for my own purposes, personal and spiritual purposes. And it turned out that the taxi cab driver who was assigned to take me was someone who was working on his English. He had been separated from his family. They were part of the Polish government in exile. They had gone to London, from London to Chicago, and he had reached retirement age and was going to be able to leave the country and be reunited for the first time with his family who were in show. So he wanted to practice his English, and in the drive over, he was asking me about my reason for being there. Why would a Presbyterian minister from Oregon make his way to Poland and, of all places, to this place? Well, when we arrived at the memorial, the museum, the former site, he insisted that he go with me. There wasn't a question. He was going with me. And he said to me, no one should ever go to this place alone. So we went. And we sat and we watched some films. They were the most grotesque films that I think I had seen. I'd been teaching Holocaust studies at the University of Oregon for 4 years at that point. The first sequence of films were taken by Nazi cinematographers of the camp in action. Hitler wanted a full record of what was going on there, even though he believed the world would never publicly acknowledge what he was in wiping out the Jewish population, that somehow that had to be recorded because it would be a proud moment in the history of the Nazi regime. The cab driver began to cry. It turns out he had not seen any of these films either. The middle sequence of films were taken by the Russian liberators of the camps. And the horror, as you can imagine, of an abandoned camp, bodies everywhere, it's what you would expect. It's the pictures you've probably seen there some time. The cab driver was sobbing by that time. And the final sequence of films were taken by United States military forces as they came in and completed the liberation of the camp. As you leave the auditorium, there's a large sign in 5 or 6 languages. It advises those who have seen the film to leave the auditorium in silence. In front of us, some people ignored that admonition and began to speak in German. The cab driver, who was shaking with rage and grief, raced up to where they were and cursed them in English, in Polish, and in German, and then disappeared. We all knew what he thought of them. At the end of the day, I made my way back to where I thought he would be, hoping that he would still be there, or I was going to be staying without a ride. It turns out he was looking as well. He wanted to tell me a story by way of explaining and apologizing for his outburst. It seemed that he, like Irene, was part of a very devout Roman Catholic family, and he had a sister who had chosen to remain single and to devote her life to the practice of public health nursing. It was an alternative for her. She did not want to become a nun or a sister, to practice this particular branch of medicine, but to do it single-mindedly, and she was a very effective person at that by his testimony. So effective that when the German regional government and command came into Krakow, she was immediately ordered to be the primary public health nurse for the Krakow Jewish ghetto. That was her job. Every day she would go into the ghetto and try to find people who were sick. She had been told that the people in the ghetto were going to be used for large workforce, regaging railroad lines, setting it up so that the advancing Nazi forces could come into the area and take over. If anyone was sick, if it became epidemic, then the ghetto would be wiped out, the labor column would be lost, and so her job was to keep people well. Though she had no medicine, no hospital, and no physicians. She would simply go from identifying people who were sick to a guard post. She would leave their names, she believed, because she had been told that they would be taken by train to sanitariums or hospitals in other parts of the country, rehabilitated and brought back. Then she would leave. One day, a neighbor came pounding at the door, yelling for her, demanding that she go immediately to an area just outside of Krakow, to a railroad line, because there were hundreds of people who were injured. When she arrived there, what she found was an incomplete action by a mobile killing unit of the Nazi army. Normally, mass graves would have been dug, the bodies would have been buried. In this case, people were simply, they had died on the trains, and they were dumped. And later, apparently, the Nazi forces would bring in some forced labor, some tractors, and move the ground and bury these people. There were folks who were still alive, badly injured, ill, seriously in serious condition, and this friend wanted her to save their lives. She had no medicine, she had no skills at that. In the process of this, she discovered people whom she had identified during the and they had come from the Krakow Jewish ghetto. And all of a sudden, she understood precisely what was happening to the people she had been assigned to help. What she did after that was a wonderful combination of altruism, wisdom, common sense, good faith, and creativity. Nazi-era rescuers are very creative people, very planful people, resourceful, but by common sense folk. Turns out she was tall. Her brother looked at me and said, about your size, meaning close to 6'2". And as it turned out, her uniform included a large hooped dress. She decided that she was going to take Jewish children out of that ghetto, hidden between her legs, and deliver them to farm families and friends in Krakow, but most of the farming region outside of the old city of Krakow. That's a bold plan. It's a very difficult plan. It required a whole lot of skill building, a whole lot of resourcing before you could do it. She went to her family members. She told them what she was going to do, something that not many rescuers could do for fear of accidental betrayal or implicating family members, and therefore they would be guilty of the same charges your family was, Irene. A very tragic kind of situation. She went to farm families, and she said, I'm going to bring Jewish children, and you're going to care for them. You'll have to pretend like they're your own children or the children of relatives, and they've sent the children here so that they would be safe from the destruction of the war itself, if not from the actual gathering of people and killing them by the genocidal acts of the Nazis. To her priest, she told the priest what she was doing. She knew the rule. If you had papers, you lived. If you didn't have papers, it was much more likely that you were going to die. She asked for baptismal certificates. All she wanted was his signature. She would take care of the rest. He refused. He said he would not interfere with the Nazis and put his own parish or his own life in jeopardy for Jews. That did not deter her for a moment. She did extract from him the promise that he would not betray her, and he did not. Small reward. What this woman did was identified the first child and had removed some of the hooping and began the child to walk bent over in half with arms around her thighs and hands on the inside of her thighs. And she would walk with this child, giving the child audible commands: turn right, turn left, stop. And this practice apparently went on for a substantial length of time until the child could imagine in advance what move she was going to make. No verbal command, anticipation, feeling the movement. And it was not one of these simple little journeys down a lovely smooth walkway like this, but it was more a journey through wet pavement, cobblestone pavement, rutted walkways, a stop at a guard post staffed by Ukrainian militia and on to another guard post to check out. It was no easy matter at all. Put in place. You can imagine the kind of tension you would be feeling at that moment when you walked out the door with a child between your legs and headed out for a guard post. She was terrified, but she maintained herself. She held her composure and made the trip. Got to the first guard post, handed off the documents. By the way, that had become, in the meanwhile, the healthiest ghetto in all of occupied Poland. There were no more sick people. She stopped identifying folks, and when she did identify people, she gave incorrect addresses and wrong names. There was a point where there was some suspicion about why she wasn't bringing names anymore. I mean, the story just kind of unfolds like this. Very wise, but very common sense. Went on to the second guard post. No problem. went out of the ghetto, down a block or so, public park, sat on a bench. The child slipped out from between her legs. She took the child by the hand and delivered that child to safety with a farm family outside the community. Incredible story. According to her brother, the taxi cab driver, she was so exhausted by this experience, the trauma, the terror, the uncertainty, that she waited a lengthy period of time before taking a second child. But she used the same strategy, and it worked. Third, and a fourth, and a fifth, until she had taken 12 children out of the ghetto, hidden between her legs. The 13th child was a child she believed to be sick with tuberculosis. Not uncommon in those circumstances. She had no medicine. She feared for the child's life. There were rumors, if my sense of the calendar is correct, there were rumors about the liquidation of that ghetto, and so I suspect a number of those forces propelled her to the decision to get this child out of there. She spent the day walking with the child and then left. Went to the first guard post, and as she arrived, the child began to cough. Probably lungs filled with fluid. And it takes longer to describe what happened than it took for it to happen. With no command whatsoever, Ukrainian militiamen came at her, and one of them hit her in the head with the butt of a rifle, knocked her and exposed the child. With no command from a commanding military officer of the German army, others held the child upside down by the legs and shot it to death. And then they shot her to death. The only command from a German officer was that the bodies were to remain there for 3 days as a warning to anyone who would rescue Jews or anyone who would make an attempt to interfere with of that ghetto. That was the taxi cab driver's explanation for his weeping, his sobbing, his outburst inside a museum that he had never dared to enter before in his life. Well, you hear stories like that for the first time, and something changes inside you. The encounter causes a person to think about the organization of a life, the structuring of values, the decisions that one makes about where one is going to go with one's vocation or whatever. I mean, every time I hear you speak, I'm moved again and again. And I go back to that encounter with a taxi cab driver whom I probably shouldn't have met. I mean, what was a nice guy from Oregon doing in Poland in 1977? It wasn't a healthy time in Poland, but there I was. And I spent the years thereafter to this day trying to get a better understanding of the moral development and later the moral and spiritual development of the women and men and children who became Nazi-era rescuers, non-Jews who took substantial personal risks to intervene. What allowed them to do that? Why did that happen? What in their lives would make it possible for them to take these risks? Now, I want to say that Mrs. Updike is not one of the people that I studied initially. My work was done in 1979, 80, and 81, the first round of that research project. And then I later stepped aside and worked with two professors from Humboldt State College, Sam and Pearl Oliner, who have written a very important book, if not the definitive book, on altruistic activities called The Altruistic Personality. I commend the book to you. The Oliners and I kind of our findings deviate a little bit from one another, but that just makes the discussions and the presentations that much more interesting. I hope that you'll take the time to look at their material. What I'd like to do briefly now, in the time that we have, is tell you some of the things that I discovered that Nazi-era rescuers shared in common, traits, characteristics, values, skills that predisposed them to these acts of compassion and kindness. as near as I can tell, few, if any, of the rescuers have all of these put together in a nice, neat package. I don't know any rescuers for whom all of this fits together in a, I don't know, in a whole lifestyle. There are pieces that come together. There are parts of this which, while they seem at first glance to be unstudied, are in fact things that folks thought about, but they didn't think about them in the context of being heroic or rescuers or whatever. They were just sort of things that were true about their lives and the way they wanted to behave. Perry London did the first round of studies of Nazi-era rescuers, and he found three things that these people shared in common. He had a sample of, I think it was 49 Nazi-era rescuers. This was very early when Nazi-era rescuers were not being studied, and they were just beginning to recognize them in Israel. Other countries had no idea who these people were or why they were special. I'm going to make some adjustments with my own research in this, but it was Perry's basic finding, and it held through the first round and then the second round studies, and the Oleners took it elsewhere, but basically undergirded it. Nazi-era rescuers had an intense identification with an articulately moral parental role model. One parent, usually, not both, but occasionally, one parent either modeled and or articulated a sequence of values that were egalitarian, that were helpful, caring, but it was a parent who modeled them. It's important for two reasons. One, very often we want to assign moral education to public school teachers who haven't got time to teach math, let alone figure out a morality that'll please everybody from Hunnicky in the Presbyterian Church to Jerry Falwell and wherever he is. So, maybe ought not worry about that so much and get it out of the schools and out of that the schools are going to save our kids from something or another. The second part of this is that it only takes one parent. And that's an intensely important observation in an age when there are many, many, many single-parent families. All it takes is one parent. Now, it was really interesting. I found a couple of the Nazi-era who had two parents who articulated the same values. And they had no question about the rightness of what they did in becoming Nazi-era rescuers. Again, the importance of that is that there's no ambiguity. The two primary people in life concurred. It was interesting that it was a greater struggle for the others who maybe had two parents, but only one of them was caring and helpful. There was a tension. Should I do this? Can I do this? Why could I have done it differently? Herman Graby, whose biography I wrote, had a mother who was his articulately moral role model. She made Luther look liberal in terms of theology and passing on of values and the like. And that's saying a great deal. She really knew the difference between right and wrong, left and right, up and down. And there was no question. For her, you either did what was right or you did what was wrong. There was no gradation in between. She always tried to get her children, her two sons, to choose a moral path. She would present a situation, or a life situation would simply occur, and she would say to her son, "Fritz, what would you do?" Mr. Graby once said to me, "My mother never asked rhetorical questions. She always expected an answer. And if we didn't have the right answer, she would help us find the right answer. And if we had no answer, we didn't leave until we had an answer, and then it had to suit her." Well, under those kinds of conditions, you come up with right answers quickly, and fortunately, Louisa Graby was a wonderful human being who cared about other people and who probably wouldn't have harmed anyone, even if she had cause. She was an altruist in her own right. We'll come back to this articulately moral parental role model in a few moments, I want to bring that story back in at another level, but suffice, she spoke of her values, linked them to biblical tradition, related to the Lutheran faith, and expected her children to be moral people. The second thing that Nazi-era rescuers had in common is that they were adventuresome people. They took risks. They went out. They didn't stay in. May I just make an observation based on your story? I shouldn't, well, I'm going to. When you're 17 and you leave your family and a war is starting and you go off to medical school to learn to be a nurse, that is an adventuresome, risky move. When at the end of a war, having been brutalized, traumatized, and taken the most profound risks to save lives, with no past people able to move into the future with you, and you go to another country, that's adventuresome. John Wiedner is one of the people who stands out as very adventuresome to me. Seventh-day Adventist, downhill skier, award-winning, ended up at a little Adventist school, college, where they were hiding Jews in the dormitories. They didn't know what to do with them. So John Wiedner said, well, we've got to get them out of here because the Vichy police and the Nazis are going to find out about them, and there's going to be big trouble. So we're going to take them over the hill. And what he did is he set up the equivalent of an underground railroad. He went over the hills, talked to the people who were Seventh-day Adventists, a part of his tradition, said, we're going to bring you these people. We want you to link them up with other Seventh-day Adventists until there's no trace of them. So they're safe. They're away from the authorities who are going to try to harm them. Well, lo and behold, he decides to start this rescue operation of his in the middle of winter. Every single night before he would take Jews through the snow and link them up miles and miles distant with other Seventh-day Adventists, John Wiedner would strap on cross-countries or snowshoes and take the route that he was going to follow. I'm not a skier. I have no sympathy for people who are. And I think that it's a bona fide certifiability for those who do it at night, in the dark. I mean, I just don't. And I asked Mr. Wiedner, why did you do that? And he looked at me like I was a fool, and I was. I'm not a skier. He said, I took that route every time to make sure that snow troops from Germany or France had not moved into the area. What right, he said, do I have to further endanger people who are already desperately endangered? So there were snow troops there. He went another direction, or he delayed the mission. Over the course of this time where Wiedner was responsible for moving Jewish people out of the dormitories and into these safe territories beyond, he was betrayed. He knew too much. He got away. He kept this whole operation going from a distance, but none of the people he rescued were harmed in any way while under his protection. Adventuresomeness, for me, would be skiing. High-risk adventuresomeness would be skiing at night. But the moral value of this is that he used his adventuresome spirit in order to risks, in order to succeed with the adventure. He wasn't just engaging the risk for the adrenaline rush, but in order to minimize the possibility of failure and maximize the possibility of success. So, the second thing that Nazi-era rescuers have in common is they're adventuresome folk. The third thing that they have in common, and I've given this a new name simply because it's not measurable in the way that Perry London did. London said that Nazi-era rescuers were socially marginal people, by and large. What I've chosen to say is that Nazi-era rescuers were religiously inspired nonconformists. That I can measure. Not that reliably, but I can measure it. nonetheless. One of the most moving stories of rescue is the story of a 13-year-old Polish Baptist girl who happened to be walking in the snow down a hill to a main road at the same time that a 13-year-old Polish Jewish girl and her father were walking on that main road trying to escape a mobile killing unit that had killed the grandparents, the wife, mother, 3 other children, and the rest of the existing family. They had escaped. They had hidden underneath this porch of the town butcher, who was a Christian but would not turn them in. He got scared, told them to leave, and now they were moving to the east through the snow, and they link up. It's an incredible story of rescue. You cannot be much more marginal than a Baptist in a predominantly white country. All right? That's a measure of social marginality. You cannot be much more marginal than a 13-year-old in a society that does not value youth, nor consider it an age of wisdom. In the case of the French Huguenots, who did the rescues in the village of Les Chambon, André Trocmé, you couldn't be much more socially marginal than a Huguenot in the south of France, let alone historic. Persecuted minority. John Weidner, Seventh-day Adventist. Same thing. Most all of these people, while you could measure to some degree, though not reliably, their social marginality, you can say of them, after interviewing them, that they were religiously inspired nonconformists. They didn't go along with the mainstream. My favorite story is of a Dutch woman who hid Jewish people one at a time in her home. Hid them underneath the bed, in the closet, in the attic. And I had the privilege of interviewing this woman in Israel. She had been honored at Yad Vashem and agreed to meet with me that afternoon because it was free. And I had a rather lengthy questionnaire and check that I used to try to assess motivation, and she wasn't answering any of those questions. She would either ignore them or skirt on to some other subject otherwise. And so I finally just said to her, "Why'd you do this? Why'd you take these risks? Why'd you save Jews?" And it was a very unfamiliar question to her. She hadn't thought about it before. And eventually allowed us how she hadn't thought about it before because it didn't seem important. The only thing that was important is that she did, not why. But anyway, she for a while longer, and then finally said to me, "Well, you know what St. Paul wrote in Romans 12:2. That's why I did it." Well, frankly, I didn't know what Paul had said in Romans 12:2 at that point, and I didn't have a Gideon's with me, and so she was kind enough to tell me that Paul said in Romans 12:2, "Be not conformed to this world, but be remade by a renewal of your mind to do what's good and right and perfect in God's sight." And then she began to cry. And she said, "If I had failed to open the door and welcome these Jewish people into my home, then I would have conformed to a world that was evil. But to open my door and to hide them and to share my food and my clothing was to have a whole new mind." By the time the war was over, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, actually I don't need my memory, 42 Jewish people were saved in that apartment. And she was in Israel to be honored for that heroic activity. Just a short note, I always like to put this in because it talks about the lifetime quality of altruism. The second day I interviewed her, she was checking her wristwatch very frequently, and it turns out that I wasn't putting her off and she didn't have something better to do in Israel. She wanted to be back home in her Kirk in Amsterdam because her refugee resettlement committee was about to receive 2 families off the South China Sea. And she chaired that committee, and she wanted to be there, not being honored in Israel, even though she had another 2 weeks or a week or so to stay there to be further honored. It was a whole pattern in her life. 40-some years later, she is still going out and drawing people off of the endangered passageways of human life and taking care of them. I always ask people, would you do it differently today? Is there anything you would have done that might give us some insights? And she knew in an instant and said, I have already done it. Now I involve everybody in my church. I don't do it alone. One of the sad things about Nazi-era rescues is that there were very few large-scale communal rescues. They just didn't really happen as widely as they should have. And one would think that with an institution like the church, which is given to an organized ethic of compassion, that there would have been all kinds of interventions of this sort. Of course, you've got the brothers at Assisi, you've got the Troc-Mays in Le Chambon, you've got scatterings of these stories, but you don't have a lot of religious organizations taking the risk that this woman later decided to take. Another thing that the Nazi-era rescuers shared in common beyond religiously inspired nonconformity was the quality of an empathic imagination. Now, one of the hypotheses that I had is that Nazi-era rescuers were people who were visualizers, they were people who were planful, they were folk who knew how to present themselves in a rather dramatic way. I even went so far as to hypothesize that these folks had had experience in the theater or were versed in dramatic arts somehow or another. Well, an empathic imagination is the ability to imagine yourself in another person's place and to try to determine what you would do in that circumstance. It's the ability to relocate yourself into the life and being of another person. Herman Graebe had by far the most empathic imagination, the most defined and refined imagination of all these folks that I've viewed. You probably know this story if you've read any of the Nazi-era history books. Herman Graebe opened the testimony at the Nuremberg trials with this story. It's recorded now in probably 150 books in dozens of languages. Graebe tells the story of being drawn to a town where he had a major work project. It was at the airport. A mobile killing unit had been. They had dug a mass grave. There was a mound of dirt. And truck after truck came into the area loaded with Jewish people who were forced off the trucks, forced to undress and leave their clothes in piles, sorted so that they could be shipped off and used otherwise. And then people were standing in line waiting to be called around and to step onto a ledge of the mass grave where they were shot one at a time. It tells the story of listening to a German officer order a woman to hold her baby up in front of her, and they shot the two of them with one bullet. Horrible scenes. Graebe arrives at this mass grave site, and he is watching this family that he imagines to be numbered 10 people. They all seem to be together. Graebe, in telling the story afterwards, to me, this would have been in 1983 when we were writing this portion of his biography, told me that there was this old man, and the old man was caressing the head of his 10-year-old son. And at one point, the boy, who is in tears, is not consolable, and the father leans over and holds his head and then points up heavens and whispers something that brings a small smile to the boy's face, and the Nazi officer orders the next 10 to move quickly, and the family disappears. Mr. Graebe became hysterical at this point in telling the story. He was deeply moved by the recollection of it. We went into the other room and sat down, and his nurse brought him some coffee, and we talked a little while, and he wanted to keep on with this story. And I said to him, Mr. Graham, how did you know that the man was old? I didn't know that he was old. He just looked to be old. He was probably my age, but he was sick and had had no food and likely had dysentery. He was my age. Well, Mr. Graby, how did you know the boy was 10? Well, I didn't know that he was 10, but he looked to be exactly the age of my son Friedel, who was 10. And then Mr. Graby said, pointing to the roof of his house in San Francisco, matter of Poland, or the Ukraine rather, I know precisely what I would say to my son at that moment. I would say, don't worry, because where we're going, there are no mass graves and no SS. And then, Graby said, at that moment, I heard my mother's voice say to me, Fritz, what will you do? She's been dead 10 years. She's buried thousands of miles away, but the articulately moral parental role model comes back and draws him into what becomes a rescue operation that was, in my mind, nearly unparalleled in the Ukraine. At the end of the war, with the German army in full retreat, Hermann Graby commandeered a 40-car train, put 348 Jews on it, and didn't take them south or north or east. He took them to Germany through Warsaw and linked them to the U.S. Army beyond the Eifel Mountains. He took a second train with the whole army in retreat and sent that train unescorted into the southern countries and eventually linked up with them again. By the time the war was over, Graby had probably either saved or extended the lives of 3,800 people. And it was a function of that empathic imagination which allowed him to be, or to see himself in, that old man who wasn't, and to see his son in the little boy who was 10 but not his son, and to hear his mother call him back. What are you going to do? That's a powerful, powerful piece. Once again, if I may, you're a visualizer. You kept talking in your presentation, and your book is laced with, oh, you do. And you see, you look, you watch. Yeah.
I see many years, but I still can feel it and see it. See the mother screaming, the children going to death. I will see that for the rest of my life.
Right. It's the ability to visualize. That's the empathic imagination at work. Another thing that Nazi-era rescuers had and this is kind of picking up on that last empathic imagination piece, was a theatrical ability. Now, I really wanted that to prove out to be true, and it didn't. Only about 42, 43% of the Nazi-era rescuers had any experience on stage or any regard for the stage. Those who did knew precisely the language of the theater arts. They knew how to present themselves. They commanded the environment. And again, Graby was one of those kinds of people. Graby had acted in the equivalent of a high school play. In college, he was injured and became a stutterer. And he went and he found an acting book that taught him how to stop stuttering. Every season of the Zolligan Light Opera, which was the community in which he lived, he would go with his friends to the performances. He often spoke of the world as a stage, borrowing somebody else's line, integrated into his life. Everything had sort of a theatrical quality, even though he was an engineer. He was a numbers cruncher. He made sure things went up and down and stayed, in place. Well, Hermann Graby learned the art of presenting himself in critical situations. There's this incredible story of how Graby was required to go into Warsaw because the Nazis had built a file on him. The underground had warned him that he was in danger, and he wasn't about to quit his rescues. He had more than 2,000 Jewish people spread around the Ukraine and was still moving them east to non-existent work camps that he had created on paper. After all, he was the manager of the regional railroad administration. He could do anything he wanted, and by golly, he did. Well, rather than lose that operation, he decided to go into town and confront the people who had the file. That's high risk, and it requires a very studied presentation of oneself. Herman Graebe waited for several days until people in the underground, in the old Ministry of Education building in Warsaw, which had been taken over by the German authorities, the SS, until they told him that it was time to go in. They were already in that building as members of the underground. They knew where the file was and whose office. They didn't know what was in it. At 3 o'clock, Graebe was told, "Go now." Now, Herman Graebe wore a tweed jacket, a big leather black trench coat. He wore pants that ballooned out around his big high leather black boots, and he drove a very dark Mercedes sedan. Not the perks usually associated, or the attire associated with one who works for the Railroad Administration. A much more humble lot. They had shoulder patches and uniform things that they had to wear. Mr. Graebe, when I asked him why he chose to wear those particular clothing, that particular outfit, he said, well, they never knew who I was. They didn't know what to read. And of course, you know who wore outfits like that. People who had special privilege, special powers, and could go where they wanted. So Graebe got to go where he wanted because nobody knew. It worked. 3 o'clock in the morning, Graebe dressed, stopped his car several blocks, Ministry of Education building, and got out and walked himself up and down the street in order to prepare himself for the confrontation. You don't just slip into the stage and have an amorous relationship or express your anger without working yourself into that role, without experiencing the emotions. And that's what Graebe was working himself up to. And he focused on the children he had seen killed by his own co-nationals. When he was ready, he drove straight up to the front of the building, pushed a guard aside, went up to the room he was told to go to. He'd been thoroughly briefed by the underground. There was a guard asleep at the door with a rifle on his lap, and he was leaning back. Graebe pushed him to the ground, walked in, went up to the desk, put his hands to his side, and said, "I'm Graebe," and then proceeded to spell his name for the SS officer. "Why are you here?" "You know why I'm here. I'm here for the file." "What file?" "The file you're keeping on me. I want the file." "You get out of my office. You have no business being in here. I'm here for the file. Get out of here." And Graebe then took his finger. He had a finger that went like this, a whole lot. If it went like this, you were in trouble. Always something bad is going to follow. And he never became aggressive. He never got in the face of this other person, had the true power. He said, "When I write my report for Berlin, it will indicate whether you helped me or hindered me. To whom do you report in Berlin? It will indicate whether you helped me or hindered me. To whom do you report in Berlin? Better for you that you don't know." The only Graebe ever filed in Berlin were requests for railroad equipment, aerials for the communication towers, and to requisition more requisition forms. That's all. He didn't report to anybody, but the man sitting across from him, who was part of a hierarchical military structure, didn't know that. And I asked Graebe, "How did you know to say that?" And he tapped his head. He said, "You have to know the German mind." You know, nobody wants to know who's above and who's below, because if you know too much, then you're in bigger trouble. And so they didn't get to know. The man pulled Graebe's file out of a desk drawer and put it on the desk and put both hands on it. Graebe was generations ahead of the improvisational art of Robin Williams. He improv'd that. "That's not the file I want." There's no other file, but you know. That's not the file I want. I want the file that shows that I am heroic, that I am loyal, that I am patriotic, that I have been away from my family for 4 years while you sit on your ass in this comfy little job here in Warsaw. I'm out there on the front lines trying to win this war. My report will indicate, and his voice grew louder and louder, and he's 84 years old. He's had 17, 18 heart attacks at the time when he's telling me this story, and he has completely dramatized the whole story for me. I thought, God, he's going to have another heart attack. Pounding on the table at this point, and he reaches over and he pulls the file out with no resistance, it up, and memorizes the names of the people who had been filing reports on him, slid it back and said, my report will indicate your cooperation, and left. Whoa. It's a theatrical art. It was all bluff. It was all done with mirrors, lies, and fantasies. Sometimes moral people have to do that in order to do what they have to do, right? Right. The last thing I want to describe, actually, I've probably gone on too long. I think I'll stop simply to say that the last major quality of Nazi-era rescuers is that they were hospitable people. They were people who took very endangered, evil environments and transformed them into welcoming, safeguarding kinds of environments, whether it was still hiding them down in the basement of the general's house or any act. It was hospitality. So a few tales about some of the things that some of these people had in common, some things that are teachable, that can be reproduced, and we're certainly not done exploring all this. Now, I think it's time for questions and answers, so I'll let you have... Are you going to moderate them? Yeah.
Do we have any questions?
Oh! The 13... Whoa, that's live now. The 13-year-old girl raced ahead, got her father, because the father of the Jewish girl, Helen, was incredibly sick, and she did not think that they would survive the walk, which was a little more than a kilometer. Father came, carried the man up to the farmhouse. They hid them in the attic. The mother and an infant chose to leave the area because military troops were going through the area, and went into central Poland where she stayed with family. A little over a month later, the father and eldest son in the family were in town on a wagon buying supplies, or trying to get supplies. I don't know whether they were buying them or not. And they commandeered by a German labor recruitment force and taken to an ammunition manufacturing site. That left Stefka, the 13-year-old, responsible for an entire farm, a 13-year-old Jewish girl who was a refugee, and her father hidden in the attic. 2 months, 3 months later, an entire German military unit camped on the flat lands of their property, and the German officers commandeered her house. She did something like you did, in a sense. She said, "This is my room. You can't have it. You've taken my father and my brother. You can't have my room." That was the entry room to the attic as well, through the closet. She took Helen out of the house in the middle of the night and hid her in a hole in the forest that she had some young German soldiers dig for her. Several days later, she took the father and hid him in the same hole, also a middle-of-the-night kind of maneuver. The father and daughter chose to come out of that hole one day during the daytime rather than at night, as previously agreed. They were seen by 2 German soldiers who arrested them and brought them in the back door of the house to present them to the commanding officer. Stefka happened to be standing in the kitchen at that moment, looked up and said, "Uncle, what are you doing here?" Their lives. And well, she did that when she was 14, so she had matured a lot. I mean, she really pulled one off. And it's an incredible story. We're just writing it up now and about to do some special work interviewing Helen and Stefka both. So that was a very courageous and successful intervention. Helen lives in New York. Stefka still lives in Poland on her family farm.
Yes, that's the greatest. This is my greatest present. He was born in 1944, May the 4th. My birthday is May the 5th. And that's my greatest present I will ever have in life. Alive. And I did see him 5 years ago, and it is to think that his son and daughter will marry, they have children, and children will have children. This is the most wonderful thing, that we are able to touch the future, and that is, thank you, for maybe I'm not a good speaker, maybe. I never spoke before in my life, but somehow when the time comes, God gives me the way of expressing myself. I feel very comfortable, and most of all, I am wanted to speak to the young people because I love them very much. Maybe because I was so young, and I know how it is when you're alone and young, you study, you work, and what can happen. And I pray to God to give me another. I'm 70 years old. I am not a spring chicken, so to say. And I don't know how long I will have, but for the rest of my life, I travel. I'm crisscrossing United States, in Canada, and I'm trying to, and I know that my message, children listen, the young people listen. I receive so many letters. I receive so many laughs. When I speak in schools, even the big macho boys stay in line to be hugged and kissed. And I know this is my payment. And I am so sure that what I am doing is right, because they listen. And I maybe be able to help to change the feelings, to understand that we are all the same. Thank you.
Yes.
they have suffered enough. And all that you've done,
I am so happy when I speak. I have a big group, sometimes 1,500. I spoke to 2,000, the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. When I finish, they form line. And it's for me such a wonderful feeling. Young, they come and give me hug, and I kiss them, hug them all. Some said, thank you for my people. I know they're Jewish. Sometimes, thank you. I am Polish. I am very proud of you. And so I have quite a few times now, a young man or woman kiss me and says, Mrs. Updike, please forgive me. And I say, for what, honey? Say, I am German and I am so ashamed. Well, I hug him and kiss him and say, honey, you're not guilty. You were not born even. They ask me, what should I do? I say, did you hurt me? Stand up, be counted. When there is somebody the hate-monger starting trouble, and because you're German, the neo-Nazis, the skinheads, come to you and tell you to join them. Tell them where to go. Yes, you know, there are many wonderful, on the Avenue of the Righteous, they are also tree planted for the Germans. And Hitler really Hitler really, I don't know what he did. Hitler youth, you know, the young children, you know, it is unbelievable, but it's true, and it's happening, and I am very thankful that I can speak. I am sorry, I didn't finish college. I came here to United States. I was alone, and I did have to provide for myself. So I could not go to college. I wish if I would be, I did have to work, then I married, then my daughter was born, then my husband was sick. I did not have the opportunity. So I am doing the best I know how. I know that I have an accent. I know that I put something upside down, but that's me. And my book is also, like you ask, written book, because I have an accent in writing too. That's true. I was not able to go to school, but I recorded for 5 years, recorded and cried and recorded some more. My daughter is 36 years old, and she is like you, young ladies. She knows how the computer and typing and this. So she typed my story, and she cried. She said, that story of my mother, you know, sometimes she could not understand when I mispronounce in my taping, you know. So we work together. Then I have a friend, a teacher, English and German. She helped. And finally, I find it a publisher. It is a Jewish publisher that wrote story of survivors, and I am one Christian rescuer. He needed me. So he published. And the story is, my book maybe is not like professor would write. It is not with the psychological find out. I would not know how to do that. But it is story like I am speaking from my heart. Story of 17-year-old girl. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Any other questions? Yeah.
I would like us to do something. You spoke about uniting, and I think in this auditorium we're all need to be united. I would like us to stand up and join together.
Okay. That's wonderful.
And I think what you're saying is way of course, going well again.
Let's stand up and hold the hands. We are all sisters and brothers. And love is the most important thing. And I want to join together.
You asked for words, and anybody who's spoken here has spoken eloquently, and I think maybe just some silence out of respect for all of our traditions and for what we've heard, both from survivors, from rescuers, and from those of us who tell stories. Let's be silent. Thank you all.
Don't forget we have Irene's book up here for sale. I really encourage you to buy it. I just did.
Are there going to be any copies of this in the bookstore?
You didn't hear?
They don't have
I
any
just
way to
talked
pay
into
for
the
it.
mic about the book. Come and buy it.
Tell her that.
How much? It's $20.